On now? Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
What a beautiful morning, and so much appreciate everybody turning out today. I'm Dave McKee, and I'm president of the Fort Phil Kearny Bozeman Trail Association. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1985. We support state parks at the fort, and our mission is preservation, education, and promotion of the Bozeman Trail and associated sites, such as the Fetterman and Wagon Box sites in Fort Phil Kearny. Before I do the introduction, just a couple of notes. We have a welcome table at the back, and I think everybody's been through there. If you're not a member and would like to join, we've got some membership forms back there. I'd love to have you as a member. Whether you're a member or not, you can also get on our newsletter email list so we can send you an email about upcoming events. So feel free to sign up whether you're a member or not. One thing I'm very excited about is a couple of folks have been working for over a year to put together information on the life and times of Henry B. Carrington, who was the commander at Fort Phil Kearny. We just got the proof copy. We're self-printing. Acorn City Historical Society, I gotta say, and Joanne Puckett from our association, the folks from the Wyoming room of the library in Sheridan, have been working for over a year to bring together documents, things written by Carrington, things written about Carrington, and it gives you a perspective of his whole life before and after his tour at Fort Phil Kearny. So take a look, and I think you can sign up, and so that when we get the copies, you can get one. And we're expecting people to be able to buy a copy, Joanne, about
By the end of the month.
by the end of the month.
The bookstore opens on May 1st.
May 1st. So check out the proof copy on your way out, and come to the bookstore and buy one. We operate the bookstore, so we're always glad to have some business. I think that covers our business. So what I'd like to do is introduce our speaker, Bob Wilson, who's going to be doing a presentation here and then walk up to the site. And before I introduce Bob, I also want to give our sincere thanks and shout out to H.B. Puckett, who's running the gear and worked with Bob on the PowerPoint today. So H.B., thanks a million for your help. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, who many of you have known for a long time, Bob Wilson. He began as an assistant superintendent, historian, and curator at Fort Phil Kearny. He obtained an American Battlefield Protection Grant to conduct archaeological research at the battlefields. He provided art composition for the interpretive signage and maps of the fort and battlefields. At some point, he and the current superintendent, Sonny Rice, decided to switch places. So Bob became the superintendent. Bob is also the commander of Kearny's Frontier Regulars, and he's an expert on historic firearms and on the history of Fort Phil Kearny and the battlefield sites. He is a skilled artist, and if you see the cover of the Carrington book, that's Bob's artwork on display back there. Skilled artist is dioramas and illustrations, and for our articles, make things come alive. Yeah. Bob also serves as co-editor for our Lookout newsletter, which is back there. You become a member, you can get those, and giving away complimentary copies today. So pick one up if you're not a member and check it out. Maybe that'll entice you to become a member. And then I was going to say finally, because of his expertise and his enthusiasm for history, Bob tends to draw large crowds for our events. In summary, our association is indebted to Bob Wilson for all the work that he does behind the scenes in keeping history alive. So with that, thank you for coming, and let's welcome Bob Wilson.
Hi, thank you. What we're going to do is cover several points of the Fetterman fight. We're going to touch on probably on the December 6th fight and a couple of different theories on how the Fetterman fight may have taken place. As much as I've studied it and everybody else has studied it, nobody really knows what happened, except the Indians, and most of their opinions are really from a very narrow perspective, just an individual's thoughts. They don't look at it quite the same way as we do. So that will go ahead and get started. If you have questions, just holler them out or raise your arm and go with it. Okay, this is kind of an overview of our Western United States without state lines or anything, which was pretty much the case back then. The reason we're showing this, and part of the reason what's going on, is we've got to go back in time a little bit, a couple of years before the Fetterman fight happens, to explain basically why it happened. A lot of the hassle, or a lot of the fighting around Fort Phil Kearny is a result of the Sand Creek fight right down here, where Black Kettle's village is attacked, and a couple of hundred Native women are killed. Most of the warriors were out raiding farms and stuff at the time. That's why they weren't at the village. And then we come up the fort up here. Get a little light to work. Right up in here is a result of the events that led up to the Fetterman fight and the different forts there. Go ahead and flick to the next one. This is Black Kettle, this is Shivington. Part of the reason Shivington attacked Black Kettle's village was he was very influential in keeping, during the Civil War, he kept the Confederacy out of Colorado. He saved the gold in Colorado and that kind of thing for the Union. He was a major part of a victory down in New Mexico. And so right after that victory, he was real famous down in Colorado. Everybody's patting him on the back and drinks and all that kind of thing. But then his fame kind of got old and nobody was patting him on the back anymore, and he wasn't getting free drinks, that kind of thing. So he wanted to do something to get his Colorado 1st Cavalry back in the glory lights again. So he decided to start going after the Indians. Now the Cheyenne down in Colorado and the Lakota had been raiding a lot of farms and ranches and stuff.
In the back, it's hard to hear you.
This is going to be hard. I'm not very good at these. Does that help? Yes. Okay. So anyhow, he put together his 1st Cavalry again. He went looking for some Indians, and Black Kettle's village had got approval where he was supposed to be. Everything was okay. He stopped by the nearest military post, and they told him where to camp and all that. Well, Shivington shows up to the same fort, finds out where Black Kettle's at. He puts a guard around the fort so none of the soldiers assigned to the fort can get out and warn Black Kettle. Next morning they attacked him, attacked his village, killed a couple hundred women, and none of the warriors were there. It was a pretty easy victory for him. Then he comes back and he's pretty famous again. He's got his glory again. He's kind of trying to be a politician. However, as word got out about the massacre at Sand Creek, his reputation went right to the rocks. And so while it didn't help him any, it started the Indians on the warpath in 1862. And from that, they attacked all across.
I need you to stand in front of the speaker if you would. Come this way. Right there. Thank you.
Why?
So we can see your pretty face.
For the camera? Okay. Anyway, this is Jim Bridger. He was about 65 years old, and he led Colonel Carrington out here and helped set up the Bozeman Trail and the forts along the Bozeman Trail. And Spotted Tail was one of the people that fought the soldiers and everybody on the Bozeman Trail. But I'm going to have you click again. This is kind of new to the PowerPoint, so we're kind of ad-libbing part of it. Okay, so this will show you the Bozeman Trail. Now, what happened after Black Kettle's village was burned was all the Cheyenne dog soldiers and a lot of the Sioux in Wyoming went down to Colorado and joined them down there, and they basically overrun the northeast corner of Colorado. Then they came up to the Oregon Trail and just started going west along the Oregon Trail, burning and pillaging. They burned the town of Julesburg. They almost took the Fort Rankin. Then they went up to the Oregon-California Trail and started following it into Wyoming. In 1865, they fought 2 battles down by Fort Casper, or where Fort Casper was at the time. So it's right here. And I don't have enough hands. Click again. Connor and Black Bear were involved in fights in 1865. The Sand Creek Massacre happens in 64. The Indians get real on the warpaths, come into Wyoming, start attacking around there. The Cheyenne down in Colorado and all the Lakota down in Colorado moved up to the northern part or into Wyoming, and north central and eastern Wyoming. And by 65, because of all the raids the Indians are conducting as a result of Sand Creek, the military decides it's time to punish the Indians. So they put on what's called the Powder River Expedition. And they send 3 columns out across the southern Wyoming. Actually, one comes from Omaha, and it goes along the eastern slope of the Black Hills. One comes out of Laramie, it goes along the western slope of the Black Hills. One comes out, another one out of Laramie, the Connor. And Connor is an overall command of all these 4 columns. Connor goes straight north, comes through the area where Fort Phil Kearny would have been. He starts a fort being built down where Fort Reno is today, and it was initially called Fort Connor. And then he goes on up to the Tongue River, and everybody's heading kind of generally towards all the rivers that drain into the Yellowstone, right south of the Yellowstone River, kind of between the Montana state line and the Yellowstone. And what he's wanting to do, they're wanting to capture the Indians and punish them. It was a very poorly prepared plan. The Cole who came out of Omaha had nobody with him for scouts. He had nobody with him that knew anything about the Black Hills or eastern Wyoming or eastern Montana. He was out there blind, basically. And Sawyer came along from Fort Laramie, joins him up just north of the Black Hills, and they go on up the Powder River some more. And one night they tied up all their horses. They had pretty close to 1,000 head of horses or animals. Half of them died on the picket line that night. 500 horses roughly in one night. And here they were in a country they knew nothing about. And a lot of the other Lakota tribes, the Hunkpapa, the Santee, were working around the northern part of the Black Hills and east of the Black Hills. And they came around and started pressing Cole's men and pushing them south, about 3,000 Indians. And so they retreated, but they didn't know actually where they were going. And Connor, lucky for the Cole column, sent a guide over to them, or to Cole's column, and Cole led them down to Fort Connor, and they got out okay. Connor's little group attacks a village of Arapaho, who at that time were friendly with the military, had no problems with them, and it was basically Connor was going to attack anybody that got in front of him. And so he attacks them, and while he kind of defeats them, he's pushing them from where Manchester is today, clear to the Bighorn Mountains. I think they're going up Tongue River Canyon. The Indians are starting in Tongue River Canyon. When he quits, well, at the point he quits, it's him and 2 other soldiers. All the other soldiers had fallen out in the pursuit of the Indians from Manchester. And so he turns around and starts heading back, and the Indians turn around and they start coming after him. So by the time the battle's over, Connor basically retreats out of where what we call the Connor fight, or right Manchester City Park is where the battle basically took place. And he goes on up Tongue River a little bit further, and then he gets orders to get back to Laramie. And he's been relieved of command because somehow the word has gone to Washington that the Powder River expedition is not going how it was supposed to. So they brought them all back. So, and a kind of a different group of politicians. You had 2 groups mainly with dealing with Indians back east. You had one that was wanting to fight the Indians and wipe them out if they could. And another group who thought we should teach the Indians and learn from the Indians and be more peaceful and have a better approach to it. Well, the peaceful Indians took over, or the peaceful politicians took over right around that time. So they pulled Connor's columns out, and they made arrangements with the military. They're going to send some more troops back out here, but they're going to build forts and they're going to work with the natives instead of fighting them and have peaceful relations. So that's when Carrington comes out with Fort Phil Kearny and that kind of thing. He brings out about 1,000 men, heads up the Bozeman Trail. Now the Bozeman Trail is really important at this time because the Civil War has just ended, and the Bozeman Trail is one of the main ways they're getting the gold back east. So and getting people up to the gold mines to mine the gold. So they want the whites to be able to travel the Bozeman Trail to get to that gold, and the politicians come out here to make a negotiation or make a treaty with the Indians that they can use the Bozeman Trail. The biggest problem with that idea is they were too late in starting the negotiations with the Indians because the military had already sent Carrington out with his column to start building the forts. So Carrington shows up down at Fort Laramie. At the same time, all the tribes are down at Fort Laramie talking about letting them use the Bozeman Trail. They haven't approved it yet. And the Indians got rather bent on that idea and says, here you've already got the soldiers and the men to build your forts, but we haven't even told you you could. You're already planning on doing it. And they walked out of the negotiations. And Carrington went ahead, went up the Bozeman Trail, rebuilt Fort Reno. Reno had been built by Civil War prisoners of war, Confederate prisoners of war. They had been in Ohio or Iowa, and in the prison, the prisoner of war prison out there, they gave them the option they could go west and fight Indians, or they could die of any number of diseases at the prison. So a lot of those men joined the volunteer ranks, and they went west to outfit the forts that were still out here before the Civil War. So they garrisoned Fort Casper, they helped build Fort Reno, and they garrisoned it and several other locations. And when Connor came up through there to build Fort Reno, there was another column called the Sawyer Expedition that was a road building group. And they went north too, and part of their column was also what we call galvanized Yankees, Confederate prisoners of war. And they stayed at Connor and helped work on it. So by the time Carrington came through, he released all the prisoners of war a year after they should have been released. They're released in the spring of '66, and the war ended in the spring of '65. But they'd been kept at Fort Reno to maintain that fort and that kind of thing. Carrington received 4 artillery pieces for use up here at the fort, at Fort Connor / Fort Reno. And he took those north and brought them up to here. When he first got them, he had nobody that knew how to use artillery, including himself. But there was a Confederate captain of artillery in the prisoner of war group at Fort Reno, and he volunteered to come north with Carrington and train an artillery crew. So that's how Fort Phil Kearny ended up with 4 cannons. They were a bunch of infantrymen that were trained to fire the cannons, shoot the cannons by a Confederate officer. And the artillery played a part in every battle out here around Fort Phil Kearny. Either helped start it or helped end it. But anyway, the Connors arrived. Go back one. We're going to figure this out.
Which way?
Forward. Okay, this is a blow up of our area. So, Phil Kearny's here. Fetterman Battlefield is right out here. It's real hard to pick it up out of these. We'll show it better later on, but it's just to give you an idea. Most of the activity we're going to discuss occurred in that restricted area. This is just to give you an overview of it. Next one. That's Carrington and Red Cloud, who was his main contestant. This is a pretty old picture of Red Cloud, and that's probably about what Carrington looked like when he was here before. He's about 40 years old. He had never been in combat, but he had raised probably at least 250,000 soldiers for the Civil War. You want to beach is that? Next. This is Carrington's map of the area, and he was very good at making maps. We know where the December 6th fight happened because of his maps. You can overlay a modern map with the map that he drew by hand for just looking at the country. But this will give you an idea. There's Fort Phil Kearny, Lodge Trail Bridge. It's just an overview of the area. Piney Islands, where Story's at today. Sullivan Hill are these hills right over here north of us. This is Lake DeSmet down here. And it was very small, Lake DeSmet. It was almost 2 ponds, very alkali, very dangerous for their livestock and stuff. Okay. This is on December 6th fight. I'm trying to find my little pointer. Yeah, I'll use it. Okay, when Carrington came out here, he was under orders to defend the people on the Bozeman Trail. He was not under any orders to attack the Indians. I don't know if I did this work. So he stayed on the defensive for his first 6 months out here. He built a fort. They established a different road, a different section of the Bozeman Trail, a shorter route up to Montana. And there were 2 trails of Bozeman, 2 routes of the Bozeman Trail. One was closer to the mountain, one was further out. But on December 6th, his officers had been really needling him to attack the Indians. And he had Fetterman, he had Brown, he had Drummond. All of them had been lieutenant colonels pretty much in the Civil War. And those were brevet ranks. And they'd been demoted back to their captain and lieutenancies. Well, they wanted those colonel ranks back. And they knew the only way to get it was to have some victory. So they wanted to fight the Indians. So they badgered Carrington, and he finally relented on December 6th. And the Indians were continuously attacking the wood train, which would go right up like that. And they attacked right in here where this road comes up. attacked the wood train almost every time it went out, usually when it was full or empty, and then when it came back, it was loaded, it would come more down like this. Anyhow, on December 6th, Carrington formed up 2 units, one of cavalry. The cavalry had finally arrived at the fort in November 4th of 1866, and the other one he used for mounted infantry. And he sent the column of cavalry after to the wood train to relieve the wood train, and they were supposed to pursue the Indians. And the Indians always retreated to the northeast. Then Carrington, with Drummond, took 50 mounted infantry with Springfield single-shot rifles, and they went another way. And the idea was to catch them on the other side of Lodge Trail Ridge, and kind of a giant, what's called a pincer movement. And so Carrington leaves and goes kind of like this, and over right here's Lodge, or Fetterman Ridge right here. And Fetterman went clear. The wood train being attacked was coming back. It was full of lumber, so it was in here. He went around and like down through here, and he's ambushed right on that corner right there. And Carrington comes through, let's see if I can get this spot, right in here. And he comes down across there. Well, Bingham, the only cavalry officer that had showed up on the fort, and Drummond ditched Carrington up in here. He joins Bingham down in here, and they race over into this area way over here. And they're surrounded by Indians. On the pursuit over there, Drummond has a sword, and that's the only weapon he has. Bingham has a pistol, he runs out of ammunition. There's about 5 enlisted men a ways behind him. But when Fetterman hit this ambush over here, the first on the corner up there, he stopped because he's basically being ambushed. Well, Bingham didn't realize that's what was going on. And Bingham just rode right through the ambush, just like nothing was going on. It must have been a little bit of a pause in the shooting or something. And he gets down in the field past the ambush. He had 5 of his men still follow him. So that's, and they pick up some Indians. Try your stick, Joanne. They came right down, right around it, right down through this and out into this field. He's got his 5 enlisted men. He's going across here, and he runs into a group of Indians right here, about 6 or 7. And they fight a little skirmish, and they take off like that. And they cross under the interstate. What's our next map? Well, this is the December 6th fight, and the interstate is coming kind of right down through here, like that. So when they get to this point, they go under the interstate, and you can see the little knob is out in the field down there. Right now it's had a Storia pit open on top of it. But when Bingham and Drummond, they're out there by themselves. Bingham had supposedly thrown his pistol away. I don't know if I believe that. But here they are, two lead officers, all they had were swords. And they look up, and there's Indians all around them, circling them, probably at least 100 Indians. And so they decide to try to break back to their enlisted men. And Drummond later says he just closed his eyes and started swinging his saber around his head like this. And if he heard a ka-dunk, he figured he hit an Indian. But he broke out doing that with his eyes closed and got back to the enlisted men. Bingham did not. He got yanked off his horse, and they split him like an elk. And there's actually a ledger drawing that we found. It was in a book at Harvard. It just stuck in some book that had nothing to do with the Fetterman fight or anything, but some student found it. It was one of the ledger drawings. This is Bingham. Brown wasn't out that day. This is Drummond, and then Fetterman. When Drummond got back to the 5 enlisted men, they were once again encircled by the Indians. This was probably more Indians than they'd seen in a group since the treaty negotiations at Fort Laramie when they came through there and decided to go north. Now they've seen 300 or 400 Indians in one day, but they really didn't know how many were out there. And Jim Bridger kept telling them, boys, there's a lot more Indians out there than you think, and they're a lot fiercer fighters than you give them credit for. The kind of general opinion at the fort was they're a bunch of savages who all they have is bows and arrows and spears, and they're not going to be able to hurt, the U.S. cavalry with their Spencer carbines and rifles and all this. So they had a pretty low opinion of what the Indians could do to them. But anyhow, Drummond retreats back and he joins Carrington on a little knob. And when he's coming across trying to get back to Carrington's command, there's an Indian right on his back, poking at him with the spear. And he's screaming at the top of his lungs, save me, God, save me, and this Indian's right there, And supposedly, I don't know if I believe this, but Carrington shot the Indian off horseback at about 150 yards with a 36 caliber pistol, which was an amazing shot if you knew what really happened. But he supposedly saved Drummond. Drummond rides up on the knob where Carrington's at and starts yelling at him, chewing him out. Is that any way to treat an officer of the U.S. military? Blah, blah, blah. He was angry because Carrington had not followed him over to where him and Bingham got in trouble. But that was because Carrington didn't know where he went. He didn't leave anybody back to say anything. So he should have been court-martialed at that spot, but he wasn't. He, in fact, now became the commander of the cavalry because he was the only one that had cavalry experience. So they all go back to the fort. When they get back to the fort, they determine that the star carbines that they were carrying, there's one over on the table over here, were not very good for fighting Indians on horseback. And the band all had, because they were the dress unit on the fort, had the best of everything, they had Spencer carbines, 7-shot Spencer carbines. So Carrington took the carbines away from the band and gave them to the cavalry for use on December 21st. We don't know if they ever fired those carbines before then, between December 6th and the 21st. We have no idea how much experience they had with their carbines. We really have no idea how much experience any of these soldiers had out here. The cavalry were an experienced group when they came out, but of the infantry, about half of them were new recruits. So we don't know how well trained they were or any of that. They didn't get hardly any training back at Fort Stephen Kearny, where they came from, and they barely got any out here because they spent all their time building the fort. So anyway, by December 21st, excuse me, they they didn't have the horses anymore, as many horses as they had on December 6th. All their horses were dying off basically from starvation because they couldn't maintain themselves on just the grass out here. I still don't know why. I used to ask my brother that question constantly. But the big eastern horses, when they came out here, did not get the nourishment from the grasses out here. They were used to getting upwards to 10 gallons of grain a day, which nowadays would be unheard of. But so they lost their weight, and they lost their weight. And on December 6th, they had about enough horses to mount 100 men. By December 21st, they had enough horses to mount about 40 men. And so they took 27 cavalry on December 21st, and they had 49 infantry. And they went out to relieve a wood train. This is, no, go ahead. This is an overview. This is the monument right here. This is Lodge Trail Bridge. And they came over to this area, and they came right down, pursuing the decoys, right down through here, and then right on down the Bozeman Trail, clear the ranch house. The cavalry did, before they're attacked. The infantry make it to about here before they're attacked. That's the main theory. That's one that's most accepted as what happened to lead into the battle. Now, there is another theory that they came over the ridge here, and they stopped around here somewhere, and then the cavalry came back over, and they came down through here, like this, and right down to these trees and stuff, right in this area. And the infantry were back in here about the time they got to the trees. And they supposedly ran into quite a few women in those trees. Now, there were women in the battlefield, or at the battle. They were there to help with any wounded and that kind of thing. So those are the two general theories we're going to cover when we get more into the battle. That gives you an idea of what you're looking at. Here we've got. This is what the fort would have looked like, basically very close to when the Fetterman fight happened. It's the only photograph or picture we have that shows the blockhouses, one here and one over here, or gun bastions. They tore this one out, and they took the west side of this one out and extended it back this way by about 40 feet. But we don't really know why they made those changes. This is supposedly probably Wheatley or Fisher's home, or somebody's home at the time. The Wheatley and Fisher end up with their houses right here and here, right in these two spots. And this would be probably Washington's Eatery or whatever. It was an after-hours club. It had a pool hall and stuff, a place for soldiers to go. The cavalry haven't arrived yet because the cavalry barracks hasn't been built. Or else, well, it could be there just starting on the barracks. But this is probably the one drawing we've got that's closest to December 21st. This is a later one. This one probably in 67, and probably late 67 possibly. They built another blockhouse down here. They tore out the two gun bastions, and they actually turned this one into a longer gun bastion. It went clear over this way, kind of like that, stuck out. They straddled the center stockade with what was called the quartermaster office. They tied the bakery into the hospital over here. The idea of fresh bread baking is going to help the sick soldiers get better. And this is depicting the Sioux Indians stealing horses from the Crow. This is a Crow camp right here. These are cavalry skirmish line right here. This is the column of cavalry going out. These are Lakotas up here, Raiders. I doubt they went out in pursuit several times when livestock was stolen, and the Indians stole it constantly, and I don't think they hardly ever recovered any. They did, and the Indians, the Sioux and stuff, they really went after mules. I guess mules tasted pretty good, so, and they could, they could get them to run as fast as a horse, so they could get away with it. These are some of the people that planned the Fetterman fight, or did leading in the Fetterman fight. This is Red Shirt. This is American Horse. American Horse, if we have a picture of the right one, I'm just not sure, is the man who either killed Drummond or killed Fetterman. One or the other is claimed to have done. Red Shirt was one of the actual battlefield leaders in charge of one of the groups of Indians. Okay, what we're going to do, this is showing where the cavalry, how the Indians and cavalry came to the battlefield. The Indians are camped right up in here. If you go out Highway 14, there's a little red shale hill right here. This is cut across the road, or the Highway 14 from, I think, what's it called, Story Cutoff, or anyway, off the it cuts out here, goes under the interstate, and then goes up here and ties back into 14 here. Well, the Indian camp was right there. There's big old flats right there. They probably had probably at least 700 wiki-ups, maybe 500 to 700 little brush shelters. They came back after the December 6th fight. the one thing the Indians learned from the December 6th fight was that if they could probably draw soldiers over Fetterman Ridge, or Lodge Trail Ridge, and if they got them over Lodge Trail Ridge, they could probably wipe them out. So that's what they started working on. And Red Cloud's big part in all this was to go to all the different tribes and try to get them to take part. So he had the Minneconjou, it was actually the Minneconjou who wanted to attack the fort on the 21st. It was their general idea. And Red Cloud was Olala. But Red Cloud went out, he even went to the Crow, who were blood enemies of the Lakota. But he wanted to know if they want to take part in attacking the soldiers. And we believe that some of them did. It wasn't a tribal plan or tribal organization, but some of the Crow warriors wanted to get some coup feathers and some claims, so they went along. And most of the people say somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 Indians in the battle. Well, that's probably correct in a way. There are up to 2,000 Indians in the battle area, but probably only about 800 actually took part in the fight. A lot of the people were horse holders. Most of the fight was conducted on foot, not on horseback. Anyway, and like we said, it happened very quickly. There was snow on the ground, probably not unlike today in a way, except it would have been all winter long snow. It had snowed in the fall, but a lot of the north slopes had melted off, or the south slopes had melted off and were dry. The ground underneath was pretty frozen, but overall there wasn't snow everywhere. It wasn't quite that covered. But this shows, so the Indians came from their camp, and they'd done this on the 19th. And they came over and they took up positions around the Fetterman fight, mostly like this. But on the 18th, or the 19th, excuse me, the cavalry came to this point and turned around and went back. They were under command of Powell that day. And Powell knew they had orders, Carrington had made explicit orders after the December 6th fight that nobody went across Lodge Trail Ridge. He knew he couldn't support them, so he issued those orders saying, don't cross Lodge Trail Ridge. Well, Powell, who was the leader of the wagon box fight and a pretty good officer, followed his orders. And on the 19th, he got there, looked around, came back. He didn't see any Indians. The same Indians were there that got Fetterman 2 days later. So the Indians went back to their camp and they called their medicine men in, trying to figure out what happened, why they didn't get the soldiers that day. And they said, the Indian name for the battle was 100 in the hand. And that name comes about with what happened between the 2 days, between the 19th and the 21st. They sent a medicine man out to seek a vision about what was going to happen in the Fetterman fight. And he goes out and he comes back and he says, well, I've got tin in my hand. And they said, well, you know, we got all these warriors around here, tin's not going to cut it. So they sent him back out, and this went on several times. And the last time he came back, his horse is stumbling like he's carrying a ton of weight. The guy on horseback is also barely sitting up because all the weight on his shoulders and everything. And he rides up to the leader and says, I have 100 in the hand. And by that he meant he had 100 soldiers' souls that were going to die when they go into battle. And so that's how they got their name for it. And the interesting thing is that Carrington's first report said 100 men. You know, it was thrown together pretty quickly. He didn't really know exactly how many got killed. But when he sent Portuguese Phillips out to go south to get relief, his note was basically saying, you know, I've lost 100 men. So anyway, this is basically showing how the Indians got there and here. The other thing the Indians, part of them may have done, is you had Minneconjou may have come down this way and up what's called Murphy Gulch. And right up here and into here and right to here. and kind of hid behind the interstate. They hid in this draw as their ambush position. The Cheyenne hid right down here at the ranch, or the Ogallala hid right down in here, right across there. The Cheyenne and the Arapaho were right over on this side. There was a group of mounted Ogallala that were right back over in, let's see if I can. Right back here, right over in here, behind this little hill. There were about 200 there. Some theories are that the Arapaho by themselves are the ones who attacked the wood train, or else it was just a group of mixed warriors. I don't know for sure. Well, this is where we can show that.
Indians.
Now, this is the Indian viewpoint we're joined with. This is going to kind of follow their route. Why you show these? You can spot some of the trails. It's also the route of the Bozeman Trail.
Is that Pinot Creek? Is that Pinot Creek there?
Yeah, I believe so. Creek on your left here. This is the Banner Ranch. It's going to be on the left, right up here where this stops. And they're right at the base of the Fetterman Ridge. We found this option on the computer when we were doing other stuff. I thought we'd try it, see what it was like. These little workments come together. And now we're going to do the military. That's going up the south slope of Longshore Ridge. We need to kind of tilt our camera up a little bit more so we can see some of the background.
Oh.
And this is kind of along the east slope of Longshore Ridge. And they're coming off. The road's right down below us. You can see the road to the monuments right over there. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the ground they covered. This is an overview of the fort and the road and stuff at the time of the fight. This is the wood road going up here. And that particular day, the wood train that left, the idea was it was going to go up here to where the bridge is today and build a bridge. They're building their first bridge. Up till then, they were fording here, and they had another ford right in here. And then they had, later on in '67, they built several blockhouses around the Story area. Story looked a lot different in those days. It was all lodgepole pine. They talk about the first branch was 70 feet in the air, or 40 feet in the air. And, you know, they would go up there, cut down 4-foot tree and cut it into 11-foot lengths, bring it back to the fort. And everything at the fort's built in 10 or 11-foot lengths. Then when they were filled, their wood wagons were full, they came back and then they dropped down this side. They came down in here and then over. And on the December 6th fight, this is where the cavalry first went over to this. The wood train was being attacked on this side, and Fetterman chased the Indians all the way, let's see, over to here, down through here, and came off the hill right here, and then they eventually came out into that field there, but the ambush occurred right in here. And I know of a Navy revolver was found over here on this slope several years ago. This shows the Oregon Trail, or the Bozeman Trail, the way it roughly went. It pretty well follows the highway that goes up there now. Then it jumped up on top of Massacre Ridge, and then at the base of Massacre Ridge or Hill, it split. And this was part of the new road that they made. It cuts over, and it cuts in, it comes into Bighorn, right where their blacksmith shop is. And this was the old road. It came down through here, it goes under and on like that, or where Highway 14 is. In some places it probably was, or Highway 14 is right on top of it. But then in other places, it's off to the side. On the December 6th fight, when they chased them, you know, down through and out into here, and the Bingham and Drummond chased the Indians on. At this time, there were only about 6 Indians that they were pursuing. And when they came onto the interstate and were coming out here, there were only like 1 left. And it kind of reminds me of that, oh heck, a movie with Dustin Hoffman in it.
Little Big Man?
Little Big Man, where the sergeant is trying to stab Little Big Man. He's on horseback. The Indians rolling around saying, "I'm an Indian," or "I'm a white man, I'm a white man." That's what I imagine when I see these 2 guys after. And supposedly it was Crazy Horse. And that ledger drawing they found shows the 2 soldiers being basically killed, shows the right weapons and the way they did it and everything. It's pretty impressive. But right out, let's see if I can spot it. This little ridge right here, at the end of this ridge is where Bingham is killed. And I think right over in here, there was a sergeant with 5 enlisted men that Drummond raced back to. And he had been wounded. Actually, he wasn't wounded yet, but there was a soldier with him that was wounded. So they tied him on his horse when they were going to escape. And all 6 of them, Drummond and the 5 soldiers, jumped on their horses and broke out of their encirclement here. One of the Indians stuck a tomahawk in the sergeant's forehead. And he lived with the tomahawk in his forehead until about 3 in the afternoon. Sitting there, I guess conscious and stuff. But anyway, about the time they sent an ambulance out from the fort, about the time they got there, he died. His name was Sergeant Bowers. And they were the 2 head men of the cavalry. Lieutenant Bingham was the head officer, and Bowers was the first sergeant. So the Indians cut off the head of the cavalry in that battle. So anyhow, that gives you an idea of the trails and stuff, at least around the fort. Now, the trail, Bozeman Trail originally, I can't tell you exactly where, but it came over here and down and crossed right here and then right on down to the roads today. You can still see the ruts on the side of the hill from that road. This is the first road. Then when the military got here, they wanted all the civilians over here, and they wanted them to camp on the east side of the river so they could keep all this grass for their livestock. Because they came out with about 500 head of cattle, 1,000 head of mules and horses. So they had a lot of, but by the end of December that same year, most of their livestock was gone. They talk about when they finally came up to relieve the fort after the Fetterman fight, which I think it was in March they finally got here. They brought replacement livestock and stuff, and they took all the animals that were here and headed back to Fort Laramie with them. And they say you could find the Bozeman Trail for years afterward by all the carcasses along the road from the horses dying going back to Fort Laramie. Okay, this basically is the start of the battle. We're not showing you anything really right now. Just to give you an idea of the ground and stuff, the wood road. So there's 22 wagons in the wood train that day. Now in '67, we knew that they had 2 wood trains of about 45 wagons each. They had several blockhouses up in Story, and they may have even had they had a water-run sawmill. They may have had that up in Story, and they had a real large building. I think right here on this point, it was 60 by 50 feet. We have no idea what it was for. It was a military building, but we don't know why it was there. And I don't fully understand the blockhouses because, well, we're not really sure. They're more of entrenchments than blockhouses. They dug a hole in the ground and piled the dirt around the hole. Then they went outside that pile of dirt and dug a trench around the outside and piled that on top of the same dirt. So if you attacked it, you came across the ground, hit a trench, you had to go through and end up over this mound, and then you would get inside the defensive position. And it may have had 4 posts and a canvas across the top to give you some shade or some cover from the weather. But if it was a building, I don't know how they kept the buildings there overnight, because the Indians would have burned them down, I would think. We have one account where the Indians came up, and actually the day that Mrs. Drummond, I think, got to the fort, they were up spending the night up in Story, I guess in a blockhouse, and the Indian came up to one of the gun slots for shooting outside the blockhouse, and he shot an arrow from the outside in and hit a soldier, and he killed him, and they were bringing him back to the fort. They were bringing him into the fort the same day that Mrs. Drummond showed up with her wagon, and that was what she saw coming into the fort, was a dead soldier with an arrow stuck in him. Welcome to Fort Phil Kearny. Okay, this shows the Indians when they first came down. Now, we're showing here the many times you may have come over like this and into this hole right here, this straw here. Or they came, like I mentioned earlier, like this. But they got in here and hung tight. Then you come down here, you had a small group of Ogallala horsemen came over here, and then the other Ogallala headed all along this creek here, Penal Creek. And the Cheyenne went furthest up here, up in here, and the Arapaho right here. Or the Arapaho went over here, or a mixture of Indians went over here. We don't know. That was the setup. And then this basically shows you the area they're kind of hiding behind. This is the wood train coming out. It probably left about 10:30 in the morning. They weren't real early risers. That day. And this was the last day. They weren't going to go out anymore on the 19th. After the 19th, they got whatever they could get. They hopefully were going to get the bridge done. And then they were going to come back to the fort and lock the gate. And nobody could leave. Everybody stay inside until spring. So the 22 wagons go out, and they're almost all the time they're ambushed in this same spot right here. Because this is about the only place on the east slope of Sullivan Hills that you can actually ride a horse up. The rest of it's too steep. And there was, I don't know what's there now, there used to be quite a pretty good archaeology field right here. Okay, this shows the cavalry, a couple of the two versions I mentioned earlier. The infantry left out of the southwest corner of the fort right here. There was a little gate there called an officer's gate, just like the one on the front of the stockade now. And the infantry, 49 of them, left there, came across the front of the fort, headed down into the creek here, creek bottom, and we don't know, if they went up that way more or just went directly across and up Lodge Grove Ridge and over. This is one of the places they may have gone to. And this is another spot they may have gone to, both the cavalry and the infantry. And the decoys they ran into were right here. Probably picked them up right in there and took them, one or the others. There was also a small group of Indians down here that were observing the fort. And that's where the first casualty of the day occurred. Carrington fired the field gun at him and dismounted one of the warriors. He was the first casualty. Okay, this is showing some of the other positions. We still have the wood train under attack up here. Now, you had two spots here where the soldiers generally may have gone to, either here or over here. On December 6th, Carrington with his men in the December 6th fight went through right in here. And they were supposed to meet Fetterman coming around there out in that plain field, but anyway, they didn't make that. So the two dots are showing where the command may have, I think they probably paused there for a minute because they were about to cross Lodge Grove Ridge, was a direct disobeyment of an order. And I think they probably stopped and said something at least about it. There was a lookout on Lodge Grove Ridge. I don't know, I kind of toyed with the idea it might have been Little Wolf. But there's a leader up here to signal all the other Indians that were hiding for attack to tell them that all the soldiers had now come into the trap. Okay. Should mention, this is the Minneconjou sitting over here still. This shows the way the infantry, if they use this point, the infantry went right down Massacre Ridge, Fetterman Ridge, and they got right to the high point down here. That's where the infantry went just a little bit beyond. If they stopped right in there, and on our next slide we'll show you the cavalry went clear of the creek. And they're still fighting the wagon walk here. Okay, this is one of the other options, I guess. At the fort, they say that they saw mounted troops. They saw them go over the ridge, but then they saw them come back over the ridge, and then they went west on Lodge Grove Ridge to a point where the viewers at the fort could not see them because the corner of Sullivan Hill were blocking their view. So they went over here somewhere and they cut down into the valley. Now, part of the big problem with this theory is the Indians down here. You had Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians right down in here. And I don't know how they would have ever got around them. But one theory suggests that, and these were all Cheyenne and Arapaho right here. And the spots where the Indians, where we show the Indians, you know, starting the attack from are pretty definitely defined. All the tribes agree on it, and so we're not, that's a confusing point. Okay, what's going on here is it's showing where the cavalry came along too. The line, we ended up with the wrong colored line, so it's just right there. And the wagon box part, the detour, so to speak, is over. And the wood train's heading back to the fort. And the attackers from there are coming over to help close the trap on them. So everybody's down on the ridge. And this kind of shows the cavalry, the high point on the ridge, the cavalry went clear the creek, and then the Indians attacked. And the cavalry did basically retreat back into here. And this should be here, but like I said, we're still messing with it. Now this goes back to the second theory, where they would have gone over and come down like this. Your infantry would have been about here when the cavalry got to here. And they both retreated, supposedly, according to this theory, like that, up to the spine of the Fetterman Battle, or Fetterman Ridge, like that. I should say, some of this is based on what a clairvoyant told me. I know you're going to think that's crazy, but Andy Anderson, I don't know if any of you knew him, he was the curator, the director of the Buffalo Museum. He called me up one day and he says, this lady's going to come out and visit you. Don't tell her anything about the Fetterman fight. Let her tell you. Take her over to the Fetterman fight and walk her down through the battlefield and see what she tells you. So I did. And we walked clear down to right in here, kind of. And at that point, she points down to where Wheatley and Fisher's position was, and she says, I see like 5 soldiers down there and a couple of other guys fighting down there in those rocks right there. And that's what we suspect was Wheatley Fisher position. And then she says, down in those trees down there are a bunch of Indian women. And the cavalry, which come down over here, run right into them. And you know, I thought, well, whatever. I wasn't fighting too hard. But then when we came back, we got on this hill right here. And this hill is where Drummond is killed. But from artifacts, we know a soldier ran across that hill firing his Spencer carbine. He fired one time, went a few feet, fired again, went a few feet, fired again. And they found 3 shell casings, all with the same imprint on the base of the cartridge. They were obviously from the same gun. When she got to there, she says, and she pointed right in the right direction. She almost standing on the line of artifacts. She says, there's a guy running across here, and he's doing something with his gun. She shows like he's jacking around into the gun, and he's shooting it. And when she said that, and described it, and she was right on the money, that kind of spooked me. Maybe something she's got to say is right here. And I had never heard about Indians at the battle site during the battle before then. And then I started asking the tribes about it. And they all said, oh yeah, there were women there. And they blame each other's women on doing the mutilation, but that's no big deal. But I mean, their mutilation was, in my book, a lot less than what they did at Sand Creek. And for a lot more reason than what they had at Sand Creek. I mean, we were just showing them stuff then. Okay, and this is showing further on. That shows where the infantry were, the big blue square. Show it again. Now, the infantry maneuvered around here quite a bit. And we're talking to the guy that did the archaeology up here. They found primers, caps from off the muskets. And they found one particular one that was from the same musket. And it found a sample in 3 different places. This gives you, they started out down here on the little ridge that goes down to Wheatley Fisher Rocks. Wheatley Fisher is right down here. Really, we don't hardly even show it at all, but it's right down here. And they started out here, they were kind of shooting off this way. And then the Indians were coming up through this draw, so they swung around kind of like a door. And they started shooting down that way. Next slide. Then they swung around this way, and they formed a battle line that goes across here like this. The infantry, they're basically kind of a skirmish line, and they were shooting to the east. Okay. Oh, we're way north. Move that down in here.
I don't know.
Well, this shows where the cavalry came to. When you go down on the battlefield, there's a big tree right here. And then there's a big head of a draw right beyond that tree, or right out to the west of that tree. And basically what the cavalry did is they went down, they were attacked. I'm not sure what we meant by this time, but anyway, then they retreated back and they formed a big kind of a backwards horseshoe or whatever, shooting down into this draw. And this is where the cavalry ended up, the fighting positions where they ended up no matter what way they got there. They all ended up pretty much in a formation where the cavalry are shooting west into this draw, and the infantry are guarding the east flank, shooting east. And then you had Wheatley Fisher out here on this point, kind of guarding the north end. Pretty much same thing. Let's give it back. By the time all this gone on, they got back to the fort. Okay, this is basically their final fighting positions, at least while they're down here, when they're fighting together. Now, the best description from the Indians, and really the only overall description we've got of the Fetterman fight from them, from several different warriors or whatever, basically say that the soldiers came over the ridge as a group, all together. Then as they headed down the ridge, they split up, and the cavalry got quite a bit from the infantry. And when they got to the high point on the ridge, up here, they split, they were totally split, separated, and the infantry stopped here, and the cavalry went on down to the creek. And when they crossed the creek, the Indians did a figure 8. Is what we call it. The Indians call it a starburst, I think is what their reference is. And this one warrior that was over here on Lodge Trail Ridge signals that everybody's in the trap. And that's when all the Indians come out of cover. They thought that on December 19th, one of the Indians that were hidden along here must have stuck his head up, and that Powell had seen it. Something had upset the ambush. So when they reorganized for the 21st, one of the warrior societies was given the job of smacking anybody on the head that stuck his head up. They weren't expecting him necessarily to live through that smack, because it was screwing up their whole thing. So anyway, then you had, well, all this is going on, they're getting into those positions. These guys have started coming across. So they come right up to here like this. They jump over and come into here, and they come right up into here. And the monument's right there. So they come up in here and they dismount all get off their horses, and they come up here and they hide in the brush and the snow and stuff, right on the south side of where the monument's at. You know, all hidden more or less. Now, when the infantry break out, let's see what the next slide shows us. Okay, so this happens first. The infantry, and I think it was probably planned. I think this is the only organized part of the battle where the military is more or less trying to fight like the military would. And they had two battle lines. They had the cavalry on the west, the infantry on the east, and then they had Wheatley Fisher out here to the north. There were about 5 NCOs with the Wheatley Fisher. And the NCOs were generally a little better armed than the regular infantrymen. But anyway, they appeared to have made some kind of arrangement between them, and the cavalry turns their horses loose. Up until this point, some of them were even shooting from horseback, but up to this, they turned them loose. The infantry bailed out of this battle line because their Indians were far enough farther away than over here. And they started back here at Mount Step, you know, hustling along, probably in formation, but moving right along. They didn't see any of this. In fact, they didn't even see the Indians come over here. There's this hill right here almost completely blocks your view of the monument when you're down in here. So they came back up here, they took their hidden positions, and the infantry come to here. I guess it's okay. The infantry well, first off, the cavalry fell back. And there's kind of a depression area right in here. And they fell back there in kind of a big corral, so to speak, and started fighting. The Indians closed in on them. They were all on foot. And so I'm thinking that you got some where you're shooting arrows trying to keep the cavalrymen's heads down and that kind of thing. But then you got other warriors running up trying to get into the circle, so to speak. And which they eventually do, of course. And the infantry run back here, and right in front of the monument area where you're going north, there's a real steep little hill. And from the bottom of that little hill, you can't really see the monument. And you come up it and pop over, there's a monument and everything. Well, they would have done that in 4 guys in a row. And when they popped up, they're on top of the monuments, the Indians popped up. So this kind of what I see. They would have gone out to their battle line, which is the 2 on the left would have pulled out to the left, 2 on the right would have gone to the right, and they would have formed a double battle line. And back here at the fort, they hear 2 volleys. Up until now, they've been hearing, you know, it started out pop, 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 you know, pop, pop. And then it got more intense when they're down below, you know, pop, 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 all that. It kind of settled off a little bit, but not too much. The cavalry still shooting. And the infantry, when they're coming back, then they pop up, they form their battle line. Then they hear from the fort 2 volleys. Boom, real loud too, with all the guns shooting. And then right behind it, another one, boom. You know, the way that's supposed to work is the first row fires, and then the second row is supposed to kind of wait until their rifle is almost completely loaded, to the point where they're lifting it up and putting their primer cap on so they can shoot a second later. Well, they didn't wait that second line. They stepped right up and so it boom, boom, and then they were out of bullets, or you know, out of gun. And the Indians just 800, possibly 800, I think probably more like 300 to 400, just ran over the top of them. It didn't take very long. It was probably done in seconds almost. And they wiped all those 49 guys here, up there, or down here in a battle line. The Indians just ran over them. It kind of kept on going, I think. I think some of the Indians headed on down here, but I also think some of the cavalry broke out and they started coming this way. So you got Indians going north, and you got a couple, 3 cavalry coming south. That's the survivor so far.
That is the next one.
Huh?
That is the next one.
It is this one. Oh, Tianite. So I missed it. This shows Tianite showing up over here. The wagons come back for the wood train. They now load them up with soldiers and ammunition, and they head out. And instead of going up the Bozeman Trail, they go up this ridge and get up on the high ground, very highest ground. And then they came around. And when you look south at where the saddle's at, there's one point right here, and then there's a flat topped hill over here next to it. That's where they stopped with their wagons. And they looked down in there, and they couldn't really see anything of Fetterman's command. All they saw was Indians. They sent a rider back to the fort telling Carrington that the valley's full of Indians. More Indians than any of them have ever seen before. And they see nothing of Fetterman's command. They don't see a thing of it. Now, by that time, Fetterman's command is history. And the Indians are down in here, they're stripping them, they're mutilating them. They pretty well probably left long johns on a lot of them, but those were cut to ribbons too, because they really cut these guys up terribly. If you kept your nose and your eyes on your face, you were lucky. I mean, they scalped and they, cut everything off, cut their legs off. Their theory on doing the mutilation, unlike Sand Creek, the mutilation plays a little bit into their religious beliefs in that if you go to the hereafter and you don't have your eyes or your tongue, you can't see or taste. If your legs are screwed up, you can't ride your horse. If your ankles, if you're hamstrung, you can't run, can't hardly walk. You're going to live in the hereafter with the same impediments that they give you at your death. And so that's some of the main reason, or some of the reason for their mutilation. Whereas down at Sand Creek, the soldiers were just doing it to be mean, so to speak, or out of anger. Because at Sand Creek, they killed mostly women, kids, and old men, but they certainly had a reason for attacking, kind of. Not those people that they killed, unfortunately, but the dog soldiers from that village had been over Kansas, Nebraska, and northern Colorado, slaughtered farms and ranches. They'd attack a farm and kill everybody in it except the wife and daughters. And they'd make them captives and take them back to be slave labor in the village. And if they fought you any, they just killed you. If you didn't fight with them long, you'd probably survive. But you had a lot of change in your lifestyle, real quickly. But so the soldiers certainly had the anger built up in them for getting even for all the atrocities supposedly in Colorado and Kansas, Nebraska. But anyway, Tianite comes around to there. He's got the 2 wagons and about 80 men. The Indians see him up here. They wave at him, come on down. And of course, he didn't go for it. And he was really concerned about where Fetterman was at. He said that rider back told him to send a cannon. Well, I didn't know how to shoot the cannon, and he didn't have any of the cannon crew with him. So Fetterman sent back a note saying, no, you don't get the cannon. He already had most of the ammunition with him from the fort. The next day, Carrington goes out to get the rest of the bodies. Tianite picked up about half the bodies that night. The next day, Carrington calls for volunteers to go out. Back at the fort, the men they left at the fort when they went out to get the rest of the bodies had 2 bullets apiece to man the whole stockade. They didn't really have enough men to man the whole stockade. So they took wagons and brought them into the upper corral, and they put a circle of wagons, like a wagon corral, around the magazine. If the Indians got over the stockade, they were to retreat to that corral. The women and children would all be placed down inside the magazine. If they get over the wagon corral, they're to pull up the magazine. Now, the women and children weren't told that. I don't know if they would have gone in there in that case, but that is supposedly what occurred. Carrington was he had right to be, except the Indians had already decided that they would suffer way too many casualties trying to get into the fort. In fact, that morning, the Indians, when Fetterman or Carrington shot at the Indians down here, that's what he was doing. He was scouting out the fort to see what it was like, what the ability would be to actually attack it instead of waiting for up here on the hill. And they decided they'd just have too many casualties. Because all they've got is about 2,000 warriors. And any of those that are killed, they can't replace. And pretty much the same warriors that fought here fought at the Little Big One, a lot of them. The older ones died off because they were younger ones. Hump, who was a big player at the Little Bighorn, he was 16 here. He was probably just a horse holder, probably didn't take part in the fighting. But later at the Little Bighorn, he plays a really big part. His grandfather led the majority of the fight here, directed the warriors. Went over to the wagon box area, or the wagon fight area, and told them how to go about attacking the wood train and that kind of thing, what to do. And he came back and helped direct the attacks at the ridge. He was very influential. Red Cloud, if he was even here, which there's some doubt about that, was way over up in here on the mountains. Watching it from, there's a big smoke signal point up there on Montcliff Ridge. And that's where he would have been. 50% of the Indians say he wasn't at that one at all. Of course, 50% of the warriors say the Crazy Horse wasn't either. But he was one of the 10 decoys. They picked 2 warriors from each tribe or each group, like 2 Minneconjou, 2 Ogallala, 2 Northern Cheyenne, 2 Arapaho. I'm not sure where the other 2 necessarily came from. That made up the decoy party to come over. And Crazy Horse got his first claim to fame, I guess, at this battle, because he had his horse trained to fake being lame. So it did draw the soldiers on. When they started to lay and stuff, he got off his horse and started acting like he was trying to take a stone out of the horse's foot or something. The horse would hold his leg up and act like it's really hurting. And Big Nose, who was one of the decoys, was killed later on. He's killed right up here when he's charging the cavalry. He went the whole length of the battle, came around here, started up here, and the horse he borrowed stumbled on him right in here somewhere, and he got shot. And a bunch of his brothers ran over to him, and he said, "Lift me up so I can watch the battle, and just leave me here." So they re-angled his body so he could watch the battle, but he died right there. But when he was leading the soldiers over as part of the decoy, he actually galloped back. This is kind of what makes me wonder about the cavalry maybe going over this way. I don't know. But he rides back through the infantry. We've got 49 infantry all in rows of 4. He rides right through them. Comes out the other end, turns around and rides right back through them. He's scot-free. And continues on down decoying the soldiers. That was pretty gutsy. Okay, this is kind of the last of it. This is almost all your soldiers, at least the infantry, were 40-some bodies, is how they say it, were found within 30 feet of the monument. There were 2 rocks there, at least we believe there were, at least I do, a lot of others do, they're referred to in a lot of accounts. 2 very large rocks, about 6 foot in diameter. One of the descriptions says it looks like somebody, like it was a 12-foot rock, dropped it on the ground and broke in half. There was about a 10-foot gap between the two halves. Most of the bodies were crammed in that 10-foot gap, and all right around that big rock. And Fetterman and Brown are killed here. Fetterman is bludgeoned on the back of the head and then has his throat slit nearly to decapitation. Brown is, they think, is shot in the side of the head, the left side, but they don't know, they're not real sure about it. He's right-handed, so he may not have shot himself, he may have shot left side of the head, but they really don't know about Brown. He's kind of confusing. Brown is killed right here. Now, for a long time they were saying American horse kills better. Well, that's changed a little bit. I mentioned when they got these guys back here, someone broke out. Well, I think Brown and a couple of cavalrymen, probably on foot or whatever, raced down to here. They run into the Indians coming north or something. There's a lot of physical evidence down in here of a soldier being killed. There's some buttons, a spur, and some other stuff. Up here on the hill, there's some rocks on the side that have 7 shell casings beside them. And then this is also where the guy ran across the hill shooting his rifle. And then one Indian account talks about American horse with several other warriors. And I don't know if it's true. They may have been from the bunch clear down there, but they came racing up through here, ran past these Indians that were finishing off the cavalry, went down here. Grumman was down here once again on his horse with his saber, closing his eyes and swinging his saber. And none of the warriors could get up to him, to get him. And apparently American horse come running by and reached out and smacked him in the back of the head with his horse, knocked him off his horse, and that was the end. I don't know how true that is. The other story is that American horse was down here as Fetterman and smacked him on the head with his war club and finished him off. But from the Indian accounts, mostly he killed 1 or 2 officers. The Indians, have you all heard about Metzger? He's a bugler, cavalry bugler, was real heroic. They say that the Indians didn't mutilate his body, they covered it up with a buffalo robe and protected him. Well, I think that's pretty much bunk. I think somebody is trying to rebuild the morale of survivors and stuff, and trying to put some glory in the battle for the whites. But the Indians talk about a sergeant in the cavalry down here when they're encircled, who keeps running out from the encirclement and grabbing his fellow soldiers that are wounded and can't get back and dragging them back to their circle. And he apparently did it several times. And they say they knew his name is Baker. The Cheyennes knew a lot of these men, a lot more of the men than the Sioux did. Because the Cheyenne came and went from the fort pretty regularly. So Baker might be the one who should be getting the glory, and not necessarily Metzger, but who knows for sure. But there's 40-some bodies found here, 27 found here, Wheelie and Fisher and some soldiers found here. Wheelie and Fisher, both their bodies had a pile of shell casings next to it from their Henry carbines. They just got their Henry carbines through mail order, probably off the internet. And next to their bodies were a pile of, 40 Henry or shell casings. They started picking them up that very day. You can't find one within a mile of that place now. But both of them had over 100 arrows stuck in them. So they were pretty angry at those two fellows. There were 60 blood spots around their rocks. So like they wounded or killed up to 60 people right around their rocks. So they were pretty lethal. I want to say there were a lot of native casualties. But when you talk to people, or Indian viewpoints, everybody's viewpoint's different. And most of the Indian ones are generally pretty low, except for one. And so I really don't know. You know, we got 81 soldiers. We're there, you know that number. But you had this attack here with 2 volleys at point-blank range with 45-70 rifles into 300 Indians maybe. They had to have caused some damage there. And then if you have 60 blood spots up here on these rocks, you wonder about there. So, and there was one account in somewhere around the 1930s, they were having something out here to do with the battle and the fort and stuff, some kind of anniversary or something. And they asked the Indians that were over here whether they wanted to go over to the battlefield. And they said no, they didn't want to go near it. It was a bad luck place. Biggest rattlesnakes in Wyoming are on Fetterman Ridge. And however, I've never seen a rattlesnake up there in 20 years. I'm sure a lot of tourists come back thinking they saw one, so I don't know. But anyway, they said there were 138 Indians killed. That's a big number. I don't know if it's the right number. It could be anywhere from 10 to 138. At the WAG, as a little bighorn, they're saying like 10 or 20 Indians. I don't know. I just think well, the Indians will back off if they're suffering too many casualties. And that amount of casualties would certainly have caused them to back off. But I don't think the North knew what was happening down here in the South, and the South didn't know what happened up on the North end either. So, but that's about it. There's another one. So, questions?
Is the bugle at the National Museum, or is that, and where are the artifacts? Are there,
Well, we've got quite a few artifacts here at Fort Phil Kearny. We're supposed to get another large amount. There were 2 guys that really worked the battlefield with metal detectors, and both of them had about 200 artifacts. And then we had another bunch from the ABP program, which was about 200 too, I guess. But one of the 2 guys that worked it, his are dedicated to come here. And the other guy was supposed to, by agreement, when he passed on or whatever, that his were supposed to come here. But he didn't make that known to his brother, who was his executive. And he sold them to a guy named Coke, I think one of the Coke colors. But I don't know for sure. But they were sold. But we are supposed to get the other collection.
So that's the other collection you're talking about is Charlie's.
Yeah. Any others?
When the fort was dedicated in 1985, the fort was dedicated as a state monument. Yeah.
Well, it was initially, there was about 3 or 4 acres. This rancher back, well, right over there below the fort, the big brown house.
Yeah.
That was the first foster place, and then it became the Geyer place. And Geyer gave about 3.5 acres to the State Historical Society. And then the State Historic Society basically became state parks or cultural resources, whatever, and the land was turned over to them. And it started in 1986. The association was founded, and they got some museum footage installed. They basically paid to have it installed, and they worked with Texaco and did a land swap to get a trail down the ridge and got the lower half of the, or well, got the upper half of the fort, and the horse pasture in front of that. That was the initial kind of deal. And then here, 10, 15 years ago, Texaco sold out and Conoco had all the property and they were selling it. They had all this divided down into 5-acre lots, the whole lower half of the fort and whole valley and everything. Well, the board went to the state and they put together money and bought the property below the fort, the lower stockade, the property going up the valley for a ways. And they also bought most of the battlefield. That's how the property came.
Are there any documentaries or movies sort of related to this whole story?
There's one from way back when called Tomahawk.
Okay.
Who's in that, Sonny?
What?
Who's in it?
Van Heflin was in it as a very youthful Jim Baker.
Oh,
Yeah,
And,
yeah, it's pretty.
Ron Hutton's in it as a soldier in street line, and we gotta get firewood, we gotta cook and eat.
It's pretty, you know, late 50s, early 60s, pretty humorous. You don't want to be in it with me or him in there.
Then there's the PBS, the Montana, Wyoming.
Yeah, they did one
PBS
on the Bozeman Trail. And
That has a section of the battle.
yeah, that's a
Okay.
documentary. Or a documentary. But, and there's been lead-ins like, what is it, Morning Star, there was a little lead-in about the Fetterman fight before Custer came on board. So a lot of the movies, which show the Indian Wars, will have a little spot in there about it, not much.
You probably fight about a lot of the early movies about the Little Big Horn, and there's bits and pieces that tie to the Fetterman Battle. We've lived in the shadow of that.
Is that off or on?
Yeah, you're good. What'd you say?
Is this off or on?
It's off, yeah.
Oops.